I walked around my desk and shook his hand. I said, "Michael, you're not bothering me at all. I'm glad to see you. How are you doing? How's your mother?" He said, "We're managing. Some days are harder than others, but we're getting through it. My mom wanted me to bring you this." He held out the white box. He said, "It's from our restaurant. My dad's special dumplings. He made them from scratch every morning. My mom's keeping the tradition going. She wanted you to have some as a thank you." I felt a lump in my throat. This family had just lost everything that mattered, and they were bringing me dumplings. I said, "Michael, you didn't have to do this, but I'm honored, truly honored. Please tell your mother thank you." He nodded and said, "There's something else I wanted to tell you. After what happened in your courtroom, after you dismissed those tickets and hugged me, something changed. I'd been feeling so lost, so angry at the world, so unable to function. But that moment reminded me that there are still good people out there, people who care. It gave me the strength to keep going. You know, you and I, we're building something here, a community of people who believe in real justice, people who understand that compassion matters as much as the law. If that's you, if you want to be part of this, hit that subscribe button right now." I said, "Michael, you didn't need me to give you strength. You already had it. You showed it by being there for your father every day, by keeping up with school despite everything, by standing in that courtroom with dignity even when you were falling apart inside." He smiled, a real smile this time. He said, "I'm doing better in my classes now. I was failing 2 courses in January because I couldn't focus on anything. But I talked to my professors, explained what happened, and they're giving me a chance to make up the work. I think I'm going to be okay." I said, "You're going to be more than okay. You're going to be extraordinary. And someday when you're a doctor treating your patients, you're going to remember what it felt like to be shown mercy when you needed it most, and you're going to pass that kindness forward." We talked for a few more minutes. He told me about his plans for the rest of the semester, about helping his mother at the restaurant on weekends, about the scholarship he was applying for to help with medical school costs. I listened to every word, and I felt something I don't always feel in this job. I felt hope. Hope that this young man was going to be okay, that his father's sacrifice wasn't going to be in vain, that he was going to take all this pain and turn it into something beautiful by dedicating his life to helping others. Before he left, he shook my hand again and said, "Your Honor, I'll never forget what you did for me. Never. When I'm a doctor someday, I'm going to treat every patient with the same compassion you showed me." I watched him walk out of my chambers, and I sat back down at my desk. I opened the white box he'd brought, and the smell of fresh dumplings filled my office. I took one bite, and I could taste the love and tradition that went into making them. I thought about Michael's father waking up early every morning for years to make these same dumplings, building a life one dumpling at a time, creating something that would outlive him. That night, I went home and shared the dumplings with my husband. I told him about Michael's visit, about how much better he seemed, about his determination to become a doctor. He smiled and said, "You planted a seed that day in your courtroom. That young man is going to spend his whole life paying forward the mercy you showed him. That's real justice." Hold on. Before I tell you the rest of this story, I need you to make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Because what happened next, what I learned about the impact of that one decision, it's something that still moves me to this day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Several months went by. Spring turned to summer. I continued my work at the courthouse, seeing hundreds of cases, making hundreds of decisions. Some days I thought about Michael and wondered how he was doing. But I had learned long ago that you can't hold on to every case, every person who comes through your courtroom. You have to trust that you made the right decision in the moment and let it go. In September, I got a letter at the courthouse. The return address said Providence College. I opened it, and inside was a handwritten note on college stationery. It was from Michael. He wrote, and I'm reading this directly, "Dear Judge Judy, I wanted to write to you at the start of my senior year to let you know how I'm doing and to thank you again for your kindness last February. This summer, I worked at Rhode Island Hospital as a volunteer in the oncology ward, the same place where my father spent his final weeks. It was hard at first being back in those hallways, but it also felt like I was honoring him by being there for other families going through what we went through. I had to pause reading because I could feel emotion rising in my throat. This kid had chosen to spend his summer volunteering in the exact place where his father had died. The courage that took, the compassion, it was remarkable." The letter continued, "I met so many families this summer who were struggling the same way we struggled. Worried about medical bills and parking and how to keep up with work while spending every free moment at the hospital. I did what I could to help them. I told them about resources. I sat with them when they needed someone to talk to. And I told them about you, about the judge who showed mercy when I needed it most. Your example taught me what kind of doctor I want to be. Not just someone who treats disease, but someone who sees the whole person and recognizes their humanity. I wiped tears from my eyes. My clerk, Christina, came in and saw me crying and asked if everything was okay. I just handed her the letter and let her read it. When she finished, she was crying too. Michael's letter ended with this: I've been accepted to several medical schools for next year. Brown University offered me a full scholarship. I'm going to accept it and stay here in Providence, the city that my father loved, the city that gave our family a chance, the city where a judge reminded me that compassion is just as important as justice. Thank you for everything, Your Honor. I hope I can make you proud. Respectfully, Michael Chen. I sat at my desk holding that letter for a long time. 40 years I'd been a judge, thousands and thousands of cases. Some you win, some you lose. Some you wonder if you made the right call. But this one, this case, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do. I wrote Michael back that same day. I told him how proud I was of him, how his father would be bursting with pride knowing his son was going to medical school on a full scholarship, how his choice to volunteer in oncology showed the kind of character that can't be taught in any classroom. I told him that he didn't need to make me proud because he already had just by being the kind of person who turns grief into purpose. This is exactly why I still put on these robes every morning after 40 years. For moments like these, for the chance to make a real difference in someone's life when they need it most. If that means something to you, if you believe in that kind of justice, show me by hitting that like button and subscribing. Let me know I'm not alone in believing this stuff matters. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at Brown University's medical school orientation. They wanted me to talk to the incoming class about ethics and compassion in medicine. I wasn't sure why they'd asked a municipal court judge to speak to medical students, but I agreed to do it. I walked into the auditorium and there were about 150 young people, all of them starting their journey to becoming doctors. Bright faces full of hope and determination. I was standing backstage preparing my remarks when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and there was Michael Chen wearing a white coat with Brown Medical School embroidered on it. He was beaming. He said, "Your Honor, I hoped you'd remember me." Remember him? I'd thought about him more times than I could count. I said, "Michael, of course I remember you. Look at you, you made it, you're here." He said, "I made it because of you, because you gave me hope on the worst day of my life. I wanted you to know that I requested that you be the speaker today. I told the dean your story about what you did for me, and she agreed that you were the perfect person to talk to us about what it means to treat patients with compassion." I was speechless. This young man had specifically asked for me to speak to his class. He'd shared our story with the medical school administration. He was making sure that other future doctors heard about the importance of mercy and understanding. The dean introduced me and I walked out onto that stage. I looked at all those young faces and I thought about the lives they were going to touch, the patients they were going to treat, the families they were going to help through their darkest moments. And I told them about Michael. I told them about the morning he walked into my courtroom carrying the weight of his father's death. I told them about the parking tickets and the choice I had to make between enforcing the law and showing mercy. I told them that the best doctors, like the best judges, are the ones who remember that behind every case, every patient, every file, there's a human being deserving of compassion. When I finished speaking, the entire auditorium stood and applauded, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Michael sitting in the third row with tears streaming down his face, clapping harder than anyone. After the event, dozens of students came up to thank me and shake my hand. But the moment that mattered most was when Michael introduced me to his mother. She was a small woman, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that looked so much like her son's. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and said in accented English, "Thank you for saving my boy." When his father died, I thought I would lose Michael too. He was so sad, so lost. But you gave him hope. You reminded him that good people still exist. You gave me my son back. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't saved anyone. I just done what felt right in the moment. But looking at this mother's grateful face, hearing the emotion in her voice, I understood that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples we never see. That day in my courtroom, when I dismissed those tickets and hugged a grieving kid, I had no idea it would lead to this moment. But that's the beautiful mystery of compassion. You never know how far it will reach. Look, I need to ask you for a favor. If this story is resonating with you, if you're getting something out of it, hit that subscribe button for me. It helps me share these lessons with more people who need to hear them. Michael graduated from medical school 3 years later. I know because he sent me an invitation to the ceremony. I couldn't attend because of my court schedule, but I sent him a card with a note that said, "Your father is smiling down on you today. You've honored his memory by becoming exactly the kind of man he hoped you'd be." Last year, I read in the Providence Journal that a new free clinic was opening on the East Side, specializing in treatment for underserved immigrant communities. The article mentioned that the clinic was founded by Dr. Michael Chen, who wanted to give back to the community that had supported his family. The clinic was named the Golden Dragon Community Health Center after his father's restaurant. I cut out that article and I keep it in my desk drawer. Sometimes when I'm having a hard day, when I'm questioning whether this job still matters, when I'm tired and wondering if I'm making any difference at all, I take out that article and I read it. I look at the picture of Michael in his white coat standing in front of his clinic, and I remember that one moment of mercy, one decision to choose compassion over strict enforcement helped create all of this. I've learned one thing in 40 years on this bench. The law is important. Rules matter. Order matters. But the law serves people, not the other way around. And sometimes the most just thing you can do is recognize that the person standing before you is going through something you can't fully understand and offer them grace instead of judgment. My father used to tell me a story about when he first came to America. He was working construction and he made a mistake that cost the company money. He was terrified he'd be fired, that he'd lose everything. But his boss, a man who'd come over 30 years earlier, just put his hand on my father's shoulder and said, "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do next." He didn't fire my father. He gave him another chance. And my father spent the rest of his life trying to pay forward that kindness. That's what we do. Those of us who've been given opportunities in this country, we remember the mercy we were shown and we extend it to others. We remember what it was like to struggle, to be afraid, to need help. And when someone stands before us in their moment of need, we respond with compassion. I think about Michael's father a lot, a man I never met, but feel like I know. He came here with nothing. He worked brutal hours in a brutal industry. He saved every penny to open a restaurant. He raised a son who's now a doctor, serving the very community he belonged to. That's the American dream right there. Not wealth or fame or power, just the chance to build something better for your children than what you had for yourself. And when that man was dying, when he was spending his last days in a hospital bed, his son was by his side, parking illegally, racking up tickets, breaking the rules. And you know what? His father wouldn't have cared about those parking tickets. He would have just been grateful that his boy was there holding his hand, saying goodbye properly. That's what mattered. That's all that ever really matters. So when Michael stood in my courtroom that February morning, I wasn't just seeing a kid with unpaid tickets. I was seeing every immigrant who ever broke their back to give their children a better life. I was seeing a son who'd done exactly what he was supposed to do, who'd honored his father in the only way that truly counts, by being there when it mattered most. The law said he owed $450. But justice, real justice, said he owed nothing except maybe permission to grieve without adding financial stress to emotional devastation. So I gave him that permission. And in doing so, I like to think I honored not just Michael and his father, but every parent who ever sacrificed for their child, every child who ever sat vigil by a dying parent's bedside, every family that ever struggled to do the right thing while following every rule perfectly. Let me stop here and ask you something. Do you think justice is just about following rules? Or do you believe that true justice requires wisdom, compassion, and the courage to see beyond the black and white of the law into the complicated grays of real human life? I genuinely want to know what you think. Leave me a comment because I read every single one. And hit that like button while you're down there. I'm 82 years old now. I've been on this bench longer than some of my clerks have been alive. People ask me all the time when I'm going to retire, when I'm going to hang up these robes and spend my days with my grandchildren. And the truth is, I think about it. My body's not what it used to be. My back hurts by the end of the day. I get tired more easily than I did 20 years ago. But then I think about Michael. I think about that moment in my courtroom when a grieving kid needed mercy and I was in a position to give it. I think about the doctor he became, the clinic he founded, the thousands of patients he's going to help over his career. I think about the ripple effects of one decision made with compassion instead of rigid adherence to rules. And I realize I'm not ready to stop yet, because maybe tomorrow another Michael will walk through those courtroom doors. Another person in crisis who needs someone to see them as a human being instead of just a case number. Another opportunity to choose mercy over judgment, understanding over punishment, compassion over cold enforcement of regulations. That's what keeps me coming back. That's what makes me set my alarm for 7 every morning and drive to that courthouse and put on these robes one more time. Not the power or the title or the authority, but the chance, just the chance that I might be able to make a real difference in someone's life on their worst day. This job has taught me so much over 40 years. It's taught me that everyone has a story, that you can't judge a person based on the charges in their file, that behind every violation, every citation, every infraction, there's a complete human being dealing with circumstances you can't see from your bench. It's taught me that mercy isn't weakness, that compassion isn't being soft on crime, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is look at the rules and decide that in this particular case, with this particular person, strict enforcement would create more injustice than justice. My father died 20 years ago. I think about him every day. I think about the lessons he taught me, the example he set, the values he instilled. He never went to college, never wore a suit to work, never sat behind a big desk making important decisions, but he was one of the wisest men I've ever known. And everything I've tried to do in my career, every decision I've made that I'm proud of, has been rooted in the simple principles he taught me. Treat people with dignity. Remember where you came from. Give others the chances you were given. Show mercy because you've needed mercy. When I dismissed Michael's tickets that morning, I wasn't thinking about going viral or being on the news or any of that. Social media wasn't even in my mind. I was just thinking about what kind of judge I wanted to be. And I knew without any doubt that I wanted to help that kid. So I did what I believed was right. I chose compassion, and that choice created something beautiful. It gave Michael the strength to keep going. It inspired him to dedicate his life to helping others. It resulted in a free clinic that's now serving hundreds of families, all because I took 30 seconds to see past the paperwork and recognize the humanity of the person standing before me. I'm curious about something. Have you ever been shown mercy when you needed it most? Has someone ever given you a break, a second chance, a moment of compassion that changed your life? Tell me your story in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. You know what the beautiful thing is? Michael's story isn't unique. I mean, his specific circumstances are his own, but the principle, the lesson, it applies to so many cases. I see. Last month, a single mother came before me with parking tickets from the street near her daughter's school. She'd been parking illegally because the legal spots were too far away, and her daughter has a disability that makes walking difficult. I dismissed her tickets. 2 weeks ago, an elderly man appeared for driving with an expired license. He'd let it lapse because he couldn't afford the renewal fee on his fixed income and needed the money for his medications. I worked with our social services office to get him help. These aren't headline-making cases. They're not going to go viral or get millions of views, but they matter. They matter to that mother who can now use that $200 for her daughter's therapy. They matter to that elderly man who can now drive legally to his doctor's appointments. They matter because they're moments where the system, which can be cold and impersonal, becomes human. That's what people don't always understand about municipal court. They think it's just about parking tickets and traffic violations, small potato stuff that doesn't really matter. But for the people standing in front of me, it matters enormously. That $100 fine might mean they can't buy groceries that week. That suspended license might mean they lose their job because they can't get to work. That court appearance might be taking time away from a sick relative or a struggling business or a child who needs them. So I listen. I really listen. I look at the person, not just the paper. I ask questions. I try to understand context. And when I can show mercy without undermining the law or public safety, I do, because that's what justice actually looks like. Not blind enforcement of rules, but wise application of principles with recognition of human complexity. People sometimes criticize me for being too soft. They say I'm not tough enough on violators, that I dismiss too many tickets, that I should just enforce the law as written. And I understand that perspective. Rules exist for reasons. Order matters. We can't have everyone ignoring regulations and expecting to be let off. But I've also learned that being tough isn't the same as being just. That punishment for punishment's sake doesn't serve anyone. That sometimes mercy is harder than judgment. Compassion requires more courage than condemnation. Anyone can sit on a bench and apply rules rigidly. It takes wisdom and heart to know when to bend, when to show grace, when to recognize that this particular case requires understanding more than enforcement. Michael taught me that I was right to trust my instincts, that the voice in my head that said, "This kid needs help, not fines," was the right voice to listen to. And every time I'm faced with a similar decision, I remember him. I remember his tears, his pain, his gratitude, and I asked myself, what would I want if this was my child? What would I hope a judge would do if my child was standing there grieving and struggling and trying to hold it together? And usually the answer becomes clear. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was too harsh on him or not harsh enough? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have made him pay something, maybe a reduced amount? Would you have required community service, or would you have dismissed everything like I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in equal justice tempered with mercy like I do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's going through a hard time, someone who needs to be reminded that there are still good people in the world, that compassion still exists, that mercy is still possible, even in a system that can feel cold and bureaucratic. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. It's about a veteran who came before me with charges that could have ruined his life, and what I discovered about his service that changed everything. I'll see you there with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Judge Judy. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law. Every single one of us, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, immigrant or native born. That's what makes this country work. That's what gives meaning to these robes I wear. And yeah, I believe the law should be enforced, but I also believe it should be enforced with wisdom, with context, with recognition that we're dealing with human beings who are doing their best in difficult circumstances. Thank you for listening to my story about Michael. Thank you for caring about a young man you've never met who lost his father too soon. Thank you for understanding why I made the choice I made. And thank you for being part of a community that still believes compassion matters, that mercy has a place in justice, that how we treat people in their darkest moments defines who we are as a society. God bless you. And remember, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything. So does kindness. So does understanding. So does taking a moment to see the person behind the case, the human behind the file, the story behind the charges. That's what I've tried to do for 40 years. And that's what I'll keep doing for as long as I'm able to climb up to this bench and look out at the faces of people who need someone to really see them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I hope this story reminded you that even in a world that can feel harsh and unforgiving, there's still room for grace. You know, I've been sitting on this bench in New York for over 40 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak walk through those courtroom doors. I've watched single mothers cry over parking tickets they couldn't afford. I've seen veterans struggle to explain why they missed a court date. I've heard every excuse, every story, every plea for mercy you could imagine. But on a cold Tuesday morning in February, a young man walked into my courtroom carrying a weight I could see from across the room, and what he told me that day still brings tears to my eyes. The way his voice cracked when he said those 4 words, the papers he pulled from his backpack with shaking hands, and what I decided to do in that moment changed not just his life, but reminded me exactly why I still put on these robes every morning. Let me tell you what happened. Because this is a story about grief, compassion, and the kind of justice that has nothing to do with the law and everything to do with being human. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I got to the courthouse that morning at 8:15, same as I have every weekday since 1985. My clerk, Christina, was already there with my coffee, strong and black, exactly how I've taken it for decades. She knows my routine better than I do sometimes. I remember hanging my coat on the rack behind my desk and looking at the stack of case files waiting for me. Traffic violations, mostly parking tickets, expired registrations, the everyday business of municipal court that most people never think about until they're standing in front of me trying to explain why they shouldn't have to pay. My father came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. He worked hard his whole life, broke his back to make ends meet. He never made much money, but he taught me something worth more than gold. He said, always remember where you come from. Remember what it's like to struggle. Remember that everyone who stands before you is a human being first, not just a case number. I've carried those words with me every single day I've been a judge. That particular morning felt like any other. I could hear the familiar sounds of the courthouse coming to life around me. Footsteps echoing in the hallways, the quiet murmur of people gathering in the courtroom. Christina came in around 9:00 and said, "We've got about 30 cases today, Judge." Pretty standard stuff, nothing too complicated. I nodded and took a sip of my coffee. I had no idea that in less than an hour, I'd be part of a moment that would test everything I believe about mercy and justice. I walked into the courtroom at 9:30 sharp. I could see about 50 people sitting in the gallery waiting for their cases to be called. Some looked nervous, some looked annoyed, some were checking their phones, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. I sat down at my bench, arranged my papers, and looked out at the faces before me. Each one of them had a story. Each one was dealing with something I couldn't see just by looking at them. That's what people don't understand about this job. Behind every citation, every ticket, every fine, there's a real person with real problems. Christina called the first few cases, parking violations. I listened to the explanations, looked at the evidence, made my rulings. A woman couldn't afford the meter because she was rushing her sick child to the doctor. I dismissed it. A man had parked in a loading zone because his elderly mother couldn't walk the extra block. I reduced his fine. These aren't just rules and regulations to me. These are people's lives, and sometimes the most important thing I can do is show a little understanding. Around 10:15, Christina called a name I'll never forget. She said, "Michael Chen." I looked up and watched a young man stand from the back row. I could tell immediately something was different about him. He was maybe 20 years old, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt like he'd pulled it from the bottom of a drawer. His hair looked like he hadn't washed it in days. But what really caught my attention were his eyes, red and swollen. The eyes of someone who hadn't slept, who'd been crying, who was carrying a burden way too heavy for someone his age. He walked up to the podium slowly, almost like his legs didn't want to carry him. I watched him set down a backpack that looked like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Christina handed me his file, and I looked at the charges. 3 parking tickets over the course of 2 months, all on the same street near Providence College, unpaid registration renewal, total fines of about $450 with late fees. Not the end of the world, but for a college student, I knew that might as well be $4,000. I said, "Mr. Chen, I'm looking at 3 parking violations here. Can you tell me what happened?" My voice was gentle. I could see this kid was barely holding it together. He opened his mouth to speak, and at first nothing came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. His voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him. He said, "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I know I should have paid these. I couldn't. I didn't have time to deal with them." I watched him grip the edge of the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I could see his knuckles turning white. I said, "You're a student at Providence College?" He nodded. I continued, "These tickets are all from the same area. Were you parking illegally near campus?" I wasn't trying to be harsh. I was trying to understand. I've learned that there's always more to the story if you're willing to listen. That's when I saw tears start to form in his eyes. He said, "Your Honor, I was parking at the hospital, Rhode Island Hospital, the street parking near the entrance. I know it's illegal. I know I wasn't supposed to park there, but I couldn't find anything else, and I needed to get inside fast." Something in my chest tightened. I said, "The hospital? Were you visiting someone?" I had a feeling I knew where this was going, and I already felt my heart breaking for this kid. He nodded again, and a tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly like he was embarrassed to be crying in my courtroom. He said, "My father. He was admitted to the ICU in December, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They said he only had a few weeks." I felt my throat get tight. I have children, grandchildren. The thought of any of them going through what this young man was experiencing made me want to come down from my bench and hug him right there. But I stayed where I was and said, "I'm so sorry to hear that. How is your father doing now?" That's when Michael Chen looked me directly in the eyes, and I saw a pain so deep it made my own eyes water. He said 4 words that I can still hear in my head clear as day. He said, "Your Honor, he died." The courtroom went completely silent. I could hear people shifting in their seats behind him. I saw Christina put her hand over her mouth. I had to take a moment before I could speak because I felt emotion rising in my own throat. This wasn't just another case anymore. This was a young man who'd lost his father while trying to be there for him in his final days. And now he was standing in my courtroom facing fines he probably couldn't afford for the crime of parking illegally while his dad was dying. I said, "When did he pass, Michael?" I used his first name. This wasn't Judge Judy talking to a defendant anymore. This was one human being talking to another who was in pain. He said, 2 weeks ago, January 28th. The funeral was last Friday." His voice cracked on the word funeral, and I watched him take a shaky breath. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't take care of these tickets sooner. I've been trying to keep up with school and be at the hospital, and everything fell apart. I couldn't keep track of anything. I could feel my own emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I've seen a lot in 40 years, but watching a kid barely out of his teens talk about burying his father while apologizing for parking tickets, it broke something in me. I said, "Michael, how old are you?" He said, 20, Your Honor. I just turned 20 in December, right before my dad went into the hospital. 20 years old. I thought about my own kids at 20, still figuring out who they were, worrying about exams and dating and what they wanted to be when they grew up. Not burying their father, not standing in court trying to explain why they couldn't pay parking tickets because they were watching their dad die. Now, let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone go through something so unfair, so heartbreaking, that it made you question everything, someone who didn't deserve the pain they were carrying? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if you're following this story, hit that like button for me. I said, Michael, do you have those tickets with you? He nodded and reached into his backpack with trembling hands. I watched him pull out a folder, and when he opened it, I could see it was full of papers, hospital documents, medical bills, and yes, the parking citations that had brought him to my courtroom. He handed them to Christina, who brought them up to me. I looked at the dates, December 15th, December 22nd, January 5th. Each one stamped with the location, hospital zone, no parking, violations clear as day. By the letter of the law, he was guilty. He'd parked illegally multiple times. The fines were legitimate, but I didn't become a judge to follow the letter of the law without considering the spirit of justice. Looking at this young man who'd spent his winter watching his father die, who'd probably sat in that hospital room holding his dad's hand instead of worrying about where he'd parked his car, I knew exactly what I had to do. I said, Michael, can you tell me about your father? What kind of man was he? I saw a surprise flash across his face. He probably expected me to lecture him about parking regulations or payment plans. He didn't expect me to ask about his dad. His voice was soft when he answered. He said he was the best man I ever knew. He came here from China when he was 18, same age I am now. Didn't speak any English. Worked in restaurants for years until he saved enough to open his own place. A little Chinese takeout on the east side. He worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, so my mom and I could have a better life. I felt tears in my own eyes now. I understood that story. Same dream, same sacrifice, different country. I said, what was the name of his restaurant? Michael said, Golden Dragon. It's still there. My mom's trying to keep it running, but it's hard without him. He was the heart of that place. Everyone knew him. Everyone loved him. I could picture it perfectly. A small immigrant family restaurant where the owner knew every customer's name, where the food was made with love and the dream of giving your kids opportunities you never had. I'd been to 100 places like that. They're the backbone of our communities, the proof that the American dream is still alive if you're willing to work hard enough. I said, your father sounds like he was a wonderful man. I'm sure he was very proud of you. Are you still in school? I knew the answer, but I wanted him to talk. I wanted him to see that I cared about him as a person, not just as a case number. He nodded. He said, yes, Your Honor, I'm a junior at Providence College PMED. I want to be a doctor. I wanted to be like the doctors who tried to save my dad. They were so kind to him, so compassionate. Even when they knew there was nothing more they could do, they treated him with dignity, pre-med. This kid was going to be a doctor. He was going to spend his life helping people, saving lives, being there for families in their darkest moments. And right now, he was standing in my courtroom, worried about $400 in parking tickets from the worst period of his life. I looked down at the papers in front of me. I looked at the dates again. I thought about this young man driving to the hospital in December, probably frantic with worry, pulling up to the entrance because every second mattered when you don't know how much time your father has left. I thought about him running inside without caring where he'd parked because parking didn't matter when your dad was dying. I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I was struggling to keep my composure. If you've ever felt that kind of empathy for someone, that deep connection to another person's pain, you know what I'm talking about. Hit that like button if you're still with me, and make sure you're subscribed because what I decided to do next, it came straight from my heart. I picked up the parking tickets one by one. I looked at each citation carefully. 3 parking violations, 1 unpaid registration, 4 pieces of paper that represented some of the worst days of this young man's life, 4 reminders of the time he spent watching his father die. I said, Michael, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I watched him straighten up a little, probably expecting me to tell him about a payment plan or community service, but that's not what I was going to say. I said, in all my years on this bench, I've learned that justice isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about understanding context. It's about recognizing that sometimes life puts people in impossible situations where following every regulation becomes secondary to being human. You were parking illegally because you were racing against time to be with your dying father. You weren't being reckless or disrespectful. You were being a devoted son. I could see confusion on his face, like he wasn't sure where I was going with this. I continued, your father came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and sacrifice. He raised a son who's going to become a doctor and help people. He did everything right, and in his final weeks, you did everything right too. You were there for him. You held his hand. You said goodbye. That's what matters. I picked up the first parking ticket. I said, this citation from December 15th, dismissed. I watched his eyes go wide. I picked up the second one, December 22nd, dismissed. The third one, January 5th, dismissed. And the registration violation also dismissed. I said, Michael, the total amount you owe to this court is $0. All fines are dismissed. All penalties are dismissed. You are free to go with no debt to this court. He just stood there staring at me. I don't think he could process what I just said. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I saw tears streaming down his face now, not bothering to hide them anymore. I wasn't finished. I stood up from my bench. I rarely do this, but I felt like I needed to. I said, Michael, would you come here for a moment? I gestured to the side of the bench. He looked confused, but he walked over slowly. When he got close enough, I stepped down from the bench completely. I'm older now. Been doing this job for decades, but in that moment, I wasn't a judge. I was a parent. I was a human being who just watched a kid barely holding himself together try to navigate bureaucracy while grieving his dad. I walked up to him and I did something I've rarely done in my courtroom. I opened my arms and I gave him a hug. I felt him collapse against me, this young man who'd been trying so hard to be strong, and I felt his whole body shake with sobs. I held him and I said quietly, so only he could hear, I'm so sorry about your father. You honored him by being there. You're going to honor him by becoming the doctor he dreamed you'd be. He's proud of you. I'm proud of you. We stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 30 seconds. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears. But I also saw something else. Relief. Gratitude. The first bit of lightness I'd seen in his expression since he'd walked in. I heard something behind me, and I turned around. The entire courtroom was standing. Every single person in that gallery was on their feet. Some were clapping, some were crying, some were doing both. I saw my clerk, Christina, wiping tears from her eyes. I saw the court officer in the corner nodding his head with respect. Michael turned to look at them too, and I watched as he seemed to realize that all these strangers, people who'd never met him or his father, were standing in solidarity with his grief, were acknowledging his loss, were telling him without words that he wasn't alone. He turned back to me and said, Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. His voice was choked with emotion, but I could hear genuine gratitude in every word. I said, You don't have to say anything. Just go be great. Go become the doctor your father knew you'd be. Help people. Show compassion. Remember this day when you're treating your own patients someday, and remember that kindness matters more than rules. He nodded, wiped his eyes one more time, grabbed his backpack, and walked out of my courtroom. I watched him go, and I had to take a moment before I could continue with the rest of my docket. I sat back down at my bench, and I took a deep breath. Christina looked at me, and I could see she understood. Some cases aren't about the law, they're about being human. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Do you think I made the right call? Should I have made him pay those tickets anyway because rules are rules? Or do you believe that compassion has a place in a courtroom? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you believe that justice should always include mercy, hit that subscribe button right now. The rest of that day's docket felt different. Every person who came before me after Michael seemed to sense that something special had happened in that courtroom. People were more respectful, more patient. There was a gentleness in the air that you don't usually feel in municipal court. I went home that night, and I told my husband what had happened. We've been married for many years, and he knows me better than anyone. He listened to the whole story, and when I finished, he had tears in his eyes. He said, You did the right thing. That's why you're still doing this job after all these years, because you remember that you're dealing with people, not just cases. I thought about Michael a lot over the next few days. I wondered how he was doing, if he was managing to keep up with his classes, if his mother was okay running the restaurant alone, if he was taking care of himself while dealing with his grief. I've learned over the years that you can't follow up with everyone who comes through your courtroom. You have to trust that you did what you could in that moment and hope it made a difference. About 3 weeks later, I was in my chambers going through paperwork when Christina knocked on my door. She said, Judge, there's someone here to see you. A young man. He doesn't have an appointment, but he said you'd remember him. I looked up and said, What's his name? She smiled. She said, Michael Chen. I stood up immediately and said, Send him in. My heart was beating a little faster. I hoped everything was okay. I hoped he wasn't in more trouble. The door opened and Michael walked in, but he looked completely different from the last time I'd seen him. His hair was washed and combed. He was wearing a clean Providence College sweatshirt, and most importantly, his eyes looked clear. Not happy exactly, but clearer, less burdened. He was carrying a small white box in his hands. He said, "Your Honor, I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to come by and thank you again for what you did for me." If Michael's story moved you, if you believe the world needs more of this kind of justice, then join our membership community, because this is exactly the kind of story we exist to tell, and I have 100 more like it waiting for you.
After 5 years, we finally found it. Looks like a ghost plane, Doc.
We'll document everything. This is history. Fun?
I don't like how quiet it is.
This is unreal. It's like the world stopped here. We need to record every detail.
This could explain why the plane vanished without a trace.
What do you think happened here? Man, this place gives me the creeps.
This must be from Flight 207, the one that disappeared. So they were never found. Until now.
So this was their story.
This was personal. A life once lived.
Look at her. The tail section still has paint markings.
No animals this close, right? Focus. We have work to do. we might never know what exactly went wrong. But this answers where they disappeared. Got everything? We documented what we could.
You are no longer forgotten.
Look at this ridge here. It matches the photo.
Yes, that's exactly where we need to set up the next monitoring station. I never thought I'd see this day. They were lost, but now they're found.
We will publish every detail. This will bring closure to many families.